Welcome everybody to virtual District Hall. This is one of our virtual pop-ups here. We do them every Tuesday from 10 to 11. We also host a series of other conversations towards innovation, economic development, and small business development throughout the week. We're partnered with SEG every Wednesday from noon to 12:30 for our Lunch and Learn series on social impact. And from 4 to 7 each Thursday, we host our regular Venture Cafe, which brings together a whole variety of discussions, workshops, and interactions. So we're doing them virtually for the next, I guess, foreseeable future. We are hoping to get back in our space at District Hall in downtown Providence anytime, but it might not be for a couple months. So we're excited that we have so many people joining us today for this conversation on why Rhode Island needs to invest in broadband. Statewide internet access varies greatly and has tremendous impact on business, education, healthcare, and civic innovation. And so today we're joined by Ainsley Cantoral, the Strategic Initiatives Advisor at PRA, Daniela Fairchild, the Director of the Rhode Island Office of Innovation, and we'll be moderated by Ashley Medeiros, the Project Director of Connect Greater Newport. And we'll have an in-depth conversation about broadband across the state. And with that, Ashley, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone, thanks for joining us. We're going to kind of talk about, break this down into 3 areas and discuss what we have seen working in Rhode Island, and starting off with today, the internet in Rhode Island today. What are our strengths? What are our barriers? What do we want to see improved? Talk about where the internet is going tomorrow and what we need to do, where we are compared to others, and what we need to do to get there, to make sure that we are staying ahead. And then what are the how to get there is the last. And so talk today, tomorrow, and how we're going to get there, suggestions and solutions, what we think are best to get there. And so I can start with myself. I have been working on broadband in the greater Newport region, which actually consists of Newport and Bristol counties. Each of which are a little different, but Newport County is the one that really brought this to my attention. I started doing business outreach, talking to businesses about what is going well, what's not going so well, and what are some of their barriers to retention and expansion here in Rhode Island. And I didn't expect to hear that the internet would be one of those barriers, but it is. And when I talked to Newport County, they don't have many options. They're also very much on islands and over water, which makes getting broadband internet a little more difficult. Bristol County has 2 internet providers, but they are still also feeling the strain of costs and not getting the speeds that they would like when it comes to business. And I think the biggest thing that we have found is that there are different types of internet. Internet is not all equal. And so there's fiber optic connections, and what most of us have here are coaxial cable connections. And there's a huge difference to that. And so those are some of the things we're going to talk about today, and also why being, Rhode Island is considered having some of the best internet connectivity in the country, but what that really means, and is that equal across the board? And so I'm going to turn it over to Daniela, who's also been working on this for quite some time now, really looking at digital inequality and how that affects people who can't afford the internet in Rhode Island.
Thanks, Ashley, and I'll jump in. Ainsley, jump in anytime here also. Ainsley and I have been doing work. So our office, the state's Office for Innovation, has been working to elevate the need to talk about and strategically focus on connectivity from a broader and state perspective to support all of our Rhode Islanders for a couple of years now. And one of our major partners in this work has been Ainsley and her team at the Providence Housing Authority, which Providence has, as Ashley mentioned, there are different needs. If you look specifically and regionally, there are different needs across the state. We have different levels of access in Newport than we do in Providence. That is not to say, however, that we have that we don't have the same level of problem. So in Newport, the type of problem that we're looking to solve for might be different, but the level of issue is still the same. And so Ainsley at PHA, Providence Housing Authority, has done a great job of elevating the need to focus for our housing authority residents and some of our lowest income and highest need in residents in the state. So I just want to do a quick frame up to ground all of us on a couple key stats. In Rhode Island, Ashley talked about the different types of internet. We have fiber optic internet, you have coaxial cable internet. Some people in places, for those who were on the line earlier, heard Ainsley lives in Burrillville. Some places still have dial-up internet, which if you harken back to your 1996 South, if you were me, that meant being on AOL IM and having my parents yell at me because they could also not use the telephone. So there are still places in Rhode Island that operate with dial-up. And as much as we love AOL IM, it's not the moment in time anymore for that type of connectivity. But we have about 14% of Rhode Islanders currently with zero access to internet in home. If you add the Rhode Islanders to that list who only have a smartphone data plan as their access point, you're about 24%. So almost a quarter of Rhode Islanders right now have no fiber or coaxial cable internet in their home. A quarter of Rhode Islanders don't have this level of connectivity, this ability to join Zoom meetings, to engage in these conversations, to order takeout online, to check in on telehealth issues, to do their homework or connect with their teachers. These things that have been an issue for a long time, but the moment that we are in right now with COVID has heightened for those who have not as deeply been paying attention to this need. And the last thing that I'll say just quickly in terms of framing, I guess last two things. One is I mentioned that 14% of Rhode Islanders have no access and another 10% only have smartphones. That is dramatically different when you look across socioeconomic and income brackets. 3% of households that make $75,000 or more have no internet in home. For households that make $20,000 or less, it's 40%. So you see some dramatic differences, and Ainsley can talk a bit about those needs, but some dramatic differences across our income levels. And all of this, we've got Dave Marble from Ocean on the line, all of this while the state sits on a decent amount of fiber optic cable. And so what I want to leave here with in this sort of swirl that I've just presented is we have, the way we talk about it is we're 90% toward true amazing supported connectivity for all of Rhode Island. We have a great groundwork lay of fiber optic cable across the state. We've missed the last mile. We have a number of Rhode Islanders who are not connected, and we've got just a little bit more work to do to get us over the hump. And so the current state of Rhode Island is we've got the groundwork, we've got the connection point, we have the connective fiber. We need to talk now about where we go in that last bit, how we manage to get from the fiber optic cable we have to ensuring equitable access across the state for all of our Rhode Islanders. We call it the last mile, but that last mile piece to really help drive our state economy and our state residents forward.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela. And Ainsley, do you want to add anything to that? Because I know you're working with a lot of the residents who can't afford to connect to the fiber optic middle mile and get a last mile connection, as we like to call it. Tell us what your experience is in the Housing Authority.
So I think with public housing, there's some unique challenges that we're facing. We're very fortunate in Rhode Island to have really good data on our public housing residents. We're one of the first in the country to kind of collect the data we need to get a sense of where people are. And like Daniela mentioned, the lower the income, the less likely you are to have a good connection. Most of our residents rely, and we do have about 12,000 residents in the city of Providence, but I think through this initiative, we've heard from housing authorities across the state, and they're in similar situations. You're looking at low income population that's saying that they're connected because they have the internet through their phone, and that's really an under connection. And so, what keeps me up at night right now is that, there are a lot of kids who are living in our housing that are probably trying to do schoolwork either on a cell phone or on, a very unreliable network. And I'm really excited this opportunity has been brought up to allow folks to get access to free Wi-Fi and all of these new tools, but the skills just aren't necessarily there for them to access those and know how to use them. And that's something that we have to really work a little work smarter to get those tools out to people. And unfortunately, right now, the challenge is we can't meet with them one-on-one. So it's not only connecting folks, but showing them how to use the technology so that they can do what they need to do to survive in this new world.
Yes, and I think here in Rhode Island, to frame a little bit, the internet, we do not consider a utility in Rhode Island. And so just like water or electricity or your gas connection, even television is all a utility. We don't have any oversight or regulation of any internet here in Rhode Island. Essentially, we're not looking at it, and most other states are. Rhode Island and Mississippi are the only two that don't have really a formal network to help support internet connectivity. And we got there because we're fortunate in many ways. The size of our state being so small, and as Daniela mentioned, we have more fiber optic coverage than any state in the country. And so that limits us in a lot of ways. So we're often said Rhode Island has the best of the best when you compare it to other states. For me, that's not even comparing apples to oranges. That's comparing a grape to a watermelon. So if you look at states like Nebraska, who have a lot of rural areas, and so their houses are miles and miles apart, and you compare their internet connectivity or lack thereof to what we have in this state the size of Rhode Island with a very dense population, that's just not comparable. But on paper, and when you look at us, it looks like we have the third best internet in the country. If we all would go online right now and do a speed test, our internets would most likely be pretty similar. If you were in a state like Nebraska, if you were in Omaha, you would have a speed much like Rhode Island. If you were in a very rural farm town, you wouldn't. And so it really offsets the data. And so for Rhode Island, on paper, we look like we're doing very well. We also were fortunate to get federal funding with Ocean in 2010 to build out this massive network. And so essentially what the federal government has said to Rhode Island is, we built you this asset. We built you the 4-lane highway to the internet. It's up to you now to build the on-ramp so that you can use it. And so because there are barriers to us using this internet connection, we don't receive any more money or any more support. And so a few years ago, Rhode Island was actually #1. In the last 2 years, we fell to #4. Other states are beginning to look at this differently than we are and surpass what we're doing. And so when we all come together, we talk about why that's important, where we are now, but then looking at the future. If we continue to stay stagnant and not really make improvements, we're going to continue to fall down that list. And the implications are they just span so many different things. You know, we are talking about kids now not being able to do their homework. Let's talk about business. When businesses have access to high speed, particularly gigabit internet, cities that are offering that are getting an influx of economic development and companies coming in. There's also telemedicine where we're seeing right now. Some of our most vulnerable populations don't have internet in their home. They don't have the resources, the access to get it. So they have to leave their house. And those are the people that are most at risk right now. We're also seeing public safety in schools. There's schools that are using smart city technology. Internet is helping with resiliency. It's lighting cities so that hurricanes can't take out the power. It's doing things such as reducing traffic by using technology. And so as we look at where we are now, but where we need to be, I think that's, something that's so important. And so I guess, Danielle, what's your experience in where we think, Rhode Island is now, but in 5-10 years, where do we need to be? And do we have the resources and the assets to get there?
Yes. Which is exciting. I think we do have the resources and the assets to get there. The question, Ashley, to your point is, can we marshal them? And how do we do that? We have, and I think we've seen this through the COVID moment now, we have a deeply committed business sector within the state. We have honestly, we work with state government a lot. We have a relatively nimble state government when it comes to this, and when it comes to solving problems generally. And the biggest issues are going to be defining and deciding exactly how we want to come together and work and push and leverage each other's skill sets. Ashley mentioned earlier, 48 states have some type of broadband coordinator in state government. Rhode Island and Mississippi being the two who don't have any designated entity, whether that be someone out of the governor's office, someone in a special executive branch, someone through a commerce corporation, or sometimes someone through a library network, interestingly. But in all states, aside from Rhode Island and Mississippi, there's someone who is able to marshal the resources that the states have in order to push on broadband. I sit on a state broadband leader network for all 50 states as sort of just like the, for now, de facto, we have no one, but I want to keep abreast of what's going on. And the problems that are surfaced in so many other states are infinitely more solvable here. People complain about the lack of fiber. They complain about these deeply rural areas where the types of solutions that need to be architected are just so much more of a lift than what we might present here. And so anyway, I would say, yes, we have the tools and resources at our disposal. The how we get there needs to be coming together, determining what the body is that will take this charge and run with it for all of us and with all of us, shepherding and marshaling all of the resources that we all have, the smarts, the infrastructure, everything. And then what does that look like in 5 or 10 years? I would say, it looks like, if you want to get, this is where it gets cool, Ashley. I'm going to actually pause on that question because that's into our third piece of like, how do we do this and what it could look like? Because that also, we could open it up for discussion with the group, because we could talk about basic internet into home for everyone, which is what we're pushing for now in the COVID moment, just as people need to be at home. But we could talk about what that looks like for, you said, emergency preparedness and emergency response, what that looks like for e-commerce across the state and much easier and smarter supply chain management, with like examples that you can pull from rural places in Kenya and other countries that are doing this really interesting work. So I think that would be a great pause and pivot to open up for conversation around what this really could look like with the full group after we get through the rest of our kind of like thinking questions.
I think in prepping for today, I just looked up what are some of the cities that have the fastest internet. And the irony in this is you probably wouldn't know where any of these places are, even in the United States. As I mentioned, the money to build out fiber optic connections goes to rural areas. So some of our most rural areas in the country have some of the best technology, and we can't get it here because we're not investing as a state in the best technology. And we're not able to access it through the federal government. And we're also not advocating to get money for places like Rhode Island. I always say we're halfway there, but we can't get the funding to do the rest. We would be better off if we didn't have anything in a lot of cases when it comes to residents and businesses. When I speak to our business community, their frustration is that they can't afford the speeds that they need. And so, as I mentioned before, there's different types of technology. So here in Rhode Island, you could have like Daniela said, that dial-up connection, at AOL, when you used to wait for the thing to spin on your screen and excited to talk to your friends. People are actually still using that. Then most of us are using what's called cable or coaxial cable. And everybody buys their internet speeds, and you can choose the speed. In the country, the minimum speed for broadband is 25 megabits. That's pretty slow. Companies could not work on 25 megabits. My house doesn't work on 25 megabits with 2 adults and a 3-year-old. And as we move forward, that's going to continue to be the case. And so the reason that the coaxial cable is inferior to fiber optic is how it's connected. And so you're sharing your internet speeds from a coax from your telephone pole. And so if you're buying 150 megabits per second internet speed, and you would go on and do a speed test right now, and I can send you a link if anybody's interested to see how much speed they are getting right now. you're not going to get what you're paying for because you're sharing that. And particularly right here, right now, when every one of your neighbors are on the internet in their home and their kids are doing their homework, your speeds are going to be much slower. I've done 2 speed tests. I buy over 300 megabits per second. And my speed test last night was 24 megabits per second. And my speed test this morning was 65 megabits per second. If you have a fiber optic connection and you buy 100 megabits per second, it's dedicated. You're getting your 100 megabits per second. You're not sharing it. That's where our businesses are saying, we need that connectivity because we have 50 people in a building. We're sending files internationally. We're sending large files, but the connection for fiber optics is expensive. And so they're saying, my quote was $17,000. I just don't have that right now. And so that's where I see a barrier, is that last mile and the cost of connection and our inability to invest in being able to help people connect to that. There are other cities and states and areas who have really taken this and figured out ways to get connection. And so you can go to Chattanooga, Tennessee, who has built out their own network and get 10 times the connection of a dedicated line for the same price that we're paying here. And I think looking forward, they've been able to really go from a struggling economy to excelling in technology. And with the assets that Rhode Island has right now, in leveraging those assets and working together, we could quite possibly have the #1 state, far exceeding any internet, not just in the country, but in the world if we wanted to, because we are fortunate to be so small and have the assets to really work together and to do that and to do it quickly. I think that's what's exciting, is this doesn't have to be a huge process. We just have to do something about it. And we just have to work together. I'm going to defer to Ainsley to see if she has anything she wants to add about what she's thinking with housing authorities and how we can connect those who can't afford even the minimal price for a connection.
Thanks. You just sparked something with me, and that's, we have residents who are constantly asking us, why isn't this a utility? And why don't we have the purchasing power of, there are 500 households in each development. Why are we not able to kind of joint buy and connect to the internet and to cable in a way that's affordable to us and that's accessible to us? And I think that's an exciting place to be, is that folks are recognizing that there's an option and an opportunity for us to move forward and to connect. I think too, we have an interesting challenge in the housing authority world, which is that our buildings are built to be bomb shelters, and that's not exactly conducive to Wi-Fi and those other kind of easy ways to get internet access out there to folks. So I think we have to look at some other alternatives that'll hardwire and get these really the faster speeds and the stronger speeds out to everyone.
I think right now too, we've all been looking at it for quite some time, looking at the underserved populations and thinking about where we are as a state. And so when you look at the internet, it's everywhere. Imagine not being able to go home and do your homework. I think Daniela told me once that 7 out of 10 middle schoolers are assigned homework on the internet. Imagine if your parent is working 2 jobs and can't get you to the library. You're going to start failing those classes just because you don't have the tools. Imagine if you want to increase your education and take online classes, you don't have access to do that in your home. And so the divide that we see is just now becoming even worse. We look at transportation as a divide and something that limits people from their possibilities. This is the same. This is, the internet is actually you're getting on the same type of, what I'm trying to say, I'm all over the place right now. You can't, if you're not giving those tools, you're not going to be able to exceed like everybody else. It's the same as going to college these days. It's the same as having a car. All of these things differentiate populations. And I think that this is just one more. And particularly today, we're seeing it. And I think even once we can go out again, this technology. I think everybody's realizing the possibilities and the ways that we can pivot and make things easier. And this is just going to maybe get worse. What are your thoughts on that, Daniela or Ainsley?
I do want to say too, like, a cell phone is not enough of a connection. And that's where I think we're seeing everyone saying, oh yeah, people are surviving, they're getting through this. A cell phone is not enough. And our kids and our businesses and our those seeking employment, our seniors who are trying to do telehealth and trying to learn, they need more than just a cell phone and cell service to connect. And that's really important to kind of keep in our frame.
So a few things to think about. Ainsley's raised two, I think, really important points that you've brought up in connection with other things. So I just wanted to call them out. One, I mean, this I think was that there's a difference between general access and access to be able to really do things. And so I can quickly, I imagine if most of you are like me, most folks on the call here are like me, you wake up and you're a little bit of a workaholic, so you check your email pretty close to upon waking up, maybe on your phone while walking around, getting your coffee, getting your kid ready, doing whatever it is that you need to do for your morning routine, and you bookmark any email that needs follow-up, because you aren't going to sit there and type vigorously on your phone, because you know that the amount of time that you would have to spend to respond to an email on your phone is exponentially larger than the amount of time that it would take you to get back to your computer and quickly off, through a regular internet connection, just like do the thing that you need to do. So one there is just naming that. I think Ainsley just wanted to put like a big pin in that one, that Wi-Fi hotspots on phones, and I've been working on that in our COVID moment. That's a great win for us in the short term. That is not a long-term solution. And the other thing, Ainsley, that you mentioned earlier was, as we're thinking about this work broadly, the need to focus on digital literacy skills additionally is also hugely important. That it's a different set of skills to operate use of your phone as it is to operate use of another type of, laptop or desktop or other device. And the beauty of this is its downfall. This is not a simple solution thing. We've been talking about this and working on this for a while now in our office, and through a lot of other of our partners and those on the call, or I bet a lot of you have been doing this also. It's not simply, we're going to put cell phone towers up and be done. It's not simply, we're going to paint the house red and call it a day. This is like a complex and complicated issue that has a lot of potential. I mentioned earlier that we're going to need different solutions likely for different parts of our state. And 5 to 10 years from now, Ashley, you asked, what do we see? I see hopefully strong access across the state with varied and variable solutions that are flexible enough to move as technology moves, but that we're also bringing all of our people along in understanding all of these things, to Ainsley's point on digital equity and digital literacy skills throughout this process. One reason we asked Ashley to facilitate this conversation is because she can talk human about technology. That itself is a skill that we all need to be getting and supporting others in coming online with.
I think you made a great point when we're talking about there's different options. And so with the internet, just like most things, it's not a one size fits all. And so you have to know what your needs are. And so the needs of a large corporation are different from the needs of a small business. The needs of a family of teenagers are probably a little different than the needs of a family of 3 with a toddler. And so just having those options, but making sure that we can get the right internet solutions to the right people and the right businesses at the right times at the right cost. And so the one thing that I see is, right now particularly, I was on a call last week with a group from Newport talking about the schools and talking about just the amount of people that they've seen at food banks. And so a few weeks ago, if you had to go to a food bank and you had to choose between food and the internet, you would choose food over and over again. Now these families have to choose between food and education of their child. And so the food banks now are running out of food because people are being laid off. In Newport specifically, we have a huge population of hospitality workers. And we don't know when that industry will ever come up to where it has been. We don't know if those jobs are ever going to come back online, even after this passes. And so there is a huge concern about that. And I think to not say that internet is a utility that is a necessity is just absurd in 2020, because we're saying TV is a necessity. So I guess,
Right.
In Rhode Island, we feel the need to regulate TV and make sure that everybody has access to TV, but we don't feel the need to look at internet in the same capacity and ensure that everybody has access to the technology for their education and their business that they need. And so that's one of the things. I'm going to call on Tuni. She wrote me a message just talking about the new technology and how businesses, small retailers who never needed the internet to the extent they do now, and how that's the only way they're able to pivot their business to ensure they survive the next few months.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm the Executive Director of Venture Cafe District Hall Providence, which is hosting this. Thank you all. We have partnered with Commerce RI to build, and we are running the Rhode Island Small Business Tech Support Program. We are helping small businesses, 10 employees or under. Most of them are micro businesses with maybe 1 to 3 to 5 employees. And we have a lot of them in the state. So Commerce RI has always had the small business hotline, and going from like 5 to 10 average calls a day, they had 1,250 calls in 1 week. Through those calls and through a survey they put out through Chambers of Commerce, they identified that the #1 thing these small businesses needed help with was basic tech support. So we created this program. We now have many amazing volunteers, from Infosys to the Spark Social, and we're helping them with everything from just getting their system set up, to help learning how to use Zoom, to a lot of where the majority of them, we're getting them set up for e-commerce. So they have many don't have websites, many do have websites, but they're not set up for e-commerce. So we're helping them build Shopify sites or upgrade their Wix.com site to an e-commerce platform. And then we're doing everything, we're also helping them with business strategy as they're figuring out what that pivot looks like, and social media. Once we get their website set up, how do they drive traffic to their sites to sell their products? So to speak to what I think, Daniela, you were just saying, it's not as easy to update your Shopify site with your cell phone. And they can't manage the orders coming in and connecting with US Postal Service or, easily without internet. Like, how could they possibly, run these businesses without the internet? So I just thought that was, we're seeing it firsthand, and we're up to 100 small businesses. We started it last week, and we're already up to 100 small businesses we're helping. We're building out those websites, and they have to have affordable internet, especially right now where those that are still open and pivoting to this e-commerce platform, they still have lost a ton of sales. So they don't have the money to pay for expensive connection, and they need good connection. So.
And that it's actually, I think it's coming to light now, but it's something that we have seen for a very long time. And we don't realize sometimes that small businesses need higher technology needs. The one complaint that I get the most is from architects. They're very small offices, maybe 2 or 3 people, but their software and their connection needs are so much greater than just most people. And architects have told me, we just can't afford the couple $1,000s a month to get the internet we need, so we just do without. And so we're really limiting our economic development. And I'm sure we can say this with a lot of small startups, entrepreneurs, and tech firms who could use higher capacity. They just don't have $1,000 a month to drop on internet, particularly in a climate where it's expensive to run a business anyways. And so add that to the cost of your utilities, your rent, all of these other things that we pile on top. It's really limiting in a lot of ways. Businesses who we're always saying small retailers should always have an online presence, they just don't. And that's one of the reasons. They're saying, something's got to give. I'm running this shop, and so I have to decide, what am I going to get out of this? And this was the perfect time to kind of show them the abilities that they could have online. But then we're going to go back to normal. And if it goes back to the normal and we can't find affordable options for these people with the technology they need, we're really going to be set behind. And I think that's what scares me. A lot is being done right now. Our internet providers have gone above and beyond to help our students, to help our businesses, to give us more speed. And we can't thank them enough. And internet providers across the country. For us here in Rhode Island, I think when we talk about moving to this next, how do we get there? We as a state decide that this is something that's important to us, and we need to help and work together collaboratively to get there. Danielle and I both have looked at Maine as one of the best examples in the country, where they have every one of their internet service providers who come together and say, okay, how are we helping everybody have internet? What are we doing? The state is investing in making sure that that happens. And that investment doesn't mean, we're building our own internet. It could be that we're helping our ISPs by giving them financial ability to expand our internet speeds to these areas, to connect to the housing authorities. There's so many different ways and models that we can do that are public-private partnerships to really help us to get where we need to go. And so I'm going to ask Danielle a little bit about what her experience has been and what are some of the great models out there that we could mimic here in Rhode Island.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple points. One is, I think, Ashley, I'm also reflecting on a question you asked earlier about what in 5 to 10 years, sort of what's ideal, what does this look like? And what you just said about small businesses, there's one world because there is no way that we come out of our COVID moment unchanged. This will impact with major ripples life as we know it in many ways for decades. The question, I think we're all still sort of swirling on figuring out exactly how. Will it accelerate some of the things that the futurists have been saying for a while? Will it pull us back in certain ways, and pause other things? But one thing in sort of a 5 to 10 year world is we may end up, if we have many more micro businesses, the ability for them to flourish will demand access to a market that is larger than their immediate physical proximal market. And so that will demand the internet. Concurrently, for our larger businesses, that about 50% of employees are in Rhode Island who have, the vast majority, this, Ashley, 90 some odd percent, Tuni, you would know this too, 90 some odd percent of our businesses are small businesses in Rhode Island.
98%. This small business is really 500 employees or less. So we actually have a huge percent of micro businesses that are under 10 employees as well.
But we also have those of our large businesses employ a lot of people. And we think about the big, issues with Citizens Bank looking for space. And do they go to the Superman building or do they buy their own? This moment is also, in talking to large businesses, shining a light on the capital costs associated with office space. And so another thing that some businesses have been loosening the reins on has been teleworking and remote working for a while now. I wonder about this moment. Either way, you're going to either need micro businesses who want a footprint more broadly than their physical proximal space. And it looks like we've got a couple micro business owners on the line right now too. So I'd be curious their thoughts on all of this. Or we're going to, have a lot of large businesses who are looking to cut or be smart about those capital costs, and employees will need to be in places with strong access. And to Ashley's point, so I just wanted to name that and then say to Ashley's point, there are a lot of different things that could happen. Anything from full public, which Chattanooga is sort of the gold standard example of that across the country, full public municipal wireless option, full private with ensuring equitable access, and often something sort of in between. Massachusetts has one option running off of our own ocean network called Open Cape. It's a municipal, or it's like a regional network that supports Cape Cod. There are a number of towns that we all probably have not totally heard of: Florida, Hawley, Monroe, some others in Western Mass, that are equally engaged in a public-private partnership to support equitable and fast access across their small towns. There are lots of places that are leapfrogging this concept that is often used in international development, but that there are enough examples now of people who have done the early stage, early adopter backbreaking labor of figuring out how to make these things work that we can draw from to really push and move the needle. Probably more, as Ashley mentioned earlier, more quickly than others. I want to jump in on a question on the chat really quickly, and then Ashley pass it back over to you. But one piece that Ainsley noted was the proper devices to connect. And then Kelly on the line asked about, are there, to the same point, devices, and how do we get to, equitable access of devices? I said there's a sort of yes, sort of answer for that. There are a couple of nonprofits that I want everybody on the call to know about. One is called PCs for People. And if you are a nonprofit or a low-income individual, you can qualify to buy a laptop, desktop, or potentially tablet, but predominantly what they have in stock are laptop and desktops from PCs for People for dependent, but about $150. So like dependent on the model and if it's a laptop or a desktop, but about $150. So that's one option, again, for nonprofits or for low-income residents. You have to qualify low-income to be able to get that option. Another is a local nonprofit called Mobile Beacon. They partner with PCs for People, but they also have for educational institutions, low-income individuals, or for nonprofits, you can buy prepaid hotspots or devices for the equivalent of $10 a month for internet access for a hotspot. As Ashley has noted, and the issue with sort of, there are many layers to this, and so if we all jump on the cellular data bandwidth, we're going to crowd the space just as we do with coaxial cable. So like that is not a for real solution for the whole world. But Kelly asked about what about devices. PCs for People and Mobile Beacon are the best options right now. There are also places that do device refurbishment. So if there are companies that are looking to donate devices, there's groups like something called eStewards is one, who will take the devices, clean them, scrub data, make sure that they're fully functional and that there's no residual cached anything to be gotten off the devices. They're standard industry certified to be able to do all this, and then they can allocate devices back. And so when you said, is there something for that? Yes-ish. There are some like general solutions, but nothing really comprehensive. And if you are an individual who lives just above the threshold for qualification for those, there is not anything.
And I've brought that up on a few cases. That's my concern, particularly right now. If you have all of these people who are losing their jobs, they may have been paying full price for the internet. There's very little solutions, and now their salaries being cut and they're dropped back, and now you have to make those choices, and that's my concern, and not knowing how long this is going to last, particularly I think in that hospitality and tourism, that we could see a much longer recovery phase. I'm going to jump a little bit. We had a question about the political will and legislative level, and Daniela and I see Representative Jarrett on the line, who's really been great pushing this forward. So we could talk a little about some of the resolution that she passed, and if Deb, would you like to talk?
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, everyone, for being here. what a robust, comprehensive conversation. And I have lots of questions and thoughts. But yeah, we have been meeting, a group of us, including Daniela, Ashley, Dave Marble has been in some meetings for about 9-10 months now. And we have framed a bill in the Rhode Island legislature. It's H7096. You can go to the General Assembly website and look at it. And it does exactly what Ashley has mentioned and Daniela have mentioned. Because Rhode Island is one of only 2 states in the nation that does not have any oversight over broadband, it asks the governor to put someone in place to do broadband oversight. And in part because when I chaired the Broadband Commission 5 years ago, there were a number of recommendations, which was that recommendation, setting up a statewide advisory council just to have these kinds of conversations. And the recommendations were never acted on. So the legislation this year says we really need to do something because we've sort of abdicated any role for the last 5 years while the rest of New England and the rest of the nation is moving forward, accessing federal dollars that could not only help some of the technology programs and issues that you've talked about, but could help many of our cities and towns, you know, with ransomware. So that's an important bill that I hope gets passed. But I also want to say one of the concerns is I think there's just a lack of education for people. People don't know what they don't know. And until someone says, you know, you're paying for X amount of megabits, but you're really only getting this because you're sharing it with so many. Well, people just don't know that. Sorry, that's my other line ringing. I apologize. I've been on mute, so you haven't heard all the distractions. But I'm really adamant about wanting to help move this conversation forward. And I think we do it by bringing all these really smart, creative people together and statutorily start looking at what does the state of Rhode Island need to do for oversight, for brokering relationships with someone like Ocean that has 48 strands of fiber optic running throughout this state, and yet we use less than 10. So there's just an awful lot of work to be done. And I believe we're going to do it. It's not going to happen in 3 months or 5 months, but it's a strategic long-term 5-year plan, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. I think, you know, we just mentioned some of the funding and the federal funding throughout, and myself and Daniela and Ainsley, this isn't our full-time job to really look at internet service in Rhode Island. We've kind of fallen into this and it's become our side gig in a lot of ways. It sometimes takes over a bit, but just recently, Danielle and I were emailing back and forth about a federal grant for connectivity for the homework divide and digital divide and telemedicine. We could use that so much right now, but it's due tomorrow or something like that. And we found it too late because we're not looking for it full time. And so we probably had the opportunity to get millions of dollars to help our issue here in Rhode Island, but no one had their eye on it. And so we dropped the ball. And this happens year after year. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we need to understand is there's ways that we can do this and there's ways that we can work together to help us achieve our goal. We just need to do the actual work.
Ashley, can I just say one thing? Because I want to follow up with that, because you're absolutely right. Without having anyone with oversight in the state, COVID-19 has forever changed our lives. And when something like this happens again, not if, but when, because the virus could come back in November, December, January, we need to make sure that we have things in place. Sorry, that's, anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Sure.
You can hear the noise, right?
And I've kind of, I think, you know, we've kind of given an overview. We're in the question and answer section. So I'm looking at a few different things and Danielle has picked up on a few, but I'm hoping David could maybe from Ocean can jump in on this one. It's a question about throttling the internet. Why do internet providers throttle the internet? And as we mentioned, I can talk overview, but I am not a tech person to be able to answer that question.
because they're using too much.
Yeah.
data.
So a number of things. I mean, I'm sitting here listening, and obviously a number of you know that in many cases here, you're preaching to the choir. And I've joined that chorus, quite a bit over my last 7 years. So a couple of things. One, when it comes to throttling, it's a real misnomer to think that internet service providers are throttling anything. They have capacity. They have systems that operate in a certain way, and the way they work to their levels of capabilities. And the truth is that congestion can happen along the way. It can happen in certain peering points in the network. It can happen. It's just the way these networks work, and we work all day long to try to alleviate some of those choke points and things like that. But what you find today in this unprecedented environment is the actual traffic patterns are markedly different than they were a couple of weeks ago, coming from homes as opposed to coming from businesses, and the way the traffic patterns work are vastly different. But I don't want to leave the idea that the internet service providers, whoever they may be, are sitting there throttling, bandwidth, on purpose for some, devious reason, because that gets out there and it's just not true. And so these are limitations of systems, and the systems will operate on a geographic basis. You will have systems that are older, that sit in certain areas that aren't as up to speeds or haven't been upgraded as much as other systems. There's all sorts of reasons for variant behavior, and believe me, we are seeing wildly variant behavior of the internet, even for people who have it. So when you run speed tests, you're going to run them in one town, and you're going to get a different answer than in another town. It just happens, and it's either the age of the systems in those regions or that connectivity. The one impression I'm getting from the discussion, the one thing I want to be really, careful about. So at the very highest level, the most controversial thing that we've just discussed for the last hour is the operation of the free market versus the regulatory market of the government. And we cannot ignore that thing, because that is where massive battles will take place, and lobbies and everything else will go on that. And we have to realize that we are now craving something that was built without regulations. So sometimes it's hard to believe how much has been created in the past 30 years without that regulatory authority, and without that regulation, and without all of that. Money has come over to the government and back into the communities to try to build this over and over again. And our last influx was now 10 years ago. The BTOP infrastructure in Rhode Island was granted to us in 2010. And so what has happened with the government funding is what they did was they went through 2 rounds of BTOP. And at the end, they said, okay, we're done with this sort of ubiquitous, broadband infrastructure thing. And what they have moved to is this idea of vertical market funding. And so they turned around and said, well, telehealth, needs money, or rural needs money, or education needs money in the form of E-rate funding for broadband, and so forth. And research needs money. And so they've started to partition that money over to those markets. And we need to be smart about partitioning what was a very broad subject today about the different needs into their constituent vertical parts, because that's where the money is. So right now, if you wanted to get the homework gap fixed with at-home students, you would go and look at the avenues in the E-rate and the special construction areas to the FCC and the E-rate program to look for that. If you wanted to build a telehealth organization that connected all the nursing homes, then you would go to the Department of Health and its funding mechanisms to do so. I can tell you that the farms all over the country are going to the USDA and creating smart farms for this particular reason. And so the reason that I'm so in favor of having a broadband office is not to create a regulatory body, but to create a place to talk. And so I'm even concerned about the concept of oversight as opposed to collaboration, right? And a place that we can all have these kinds of things and then create subcommittees that'll go off and work on a particular vertical market that takes a chunk of the problem and addresses it.
David, I agree. And I think that's why Danielle and I, the main model is very much like that. I think we know that we could never do this alone as a state, nor would we want to get into the internet business, but we do know we have multiple providers that we could bring together and help them to leverage their assets and provide support so that we can achieve our goals. And I know that we have someone from Verizon and Cox on the line if anybody wants to jump in to talk about some of those things or things that you've seen that have been successful in other states that have helped you to help residents. It would be
Thanks, Ashley, and I don't want to take too much more time, but I need to leave. So I need to go on another call. So I'll just make one more statement that you can all talk about when I leave.
Oh, sure.
Is look at what Block Island did. Don't look at what they did. It's a public-private initiation that dealt with their community anchor institutions first, and now they're going to roll out to the residences and businesses in a public-private offering. And it was through a force of the coalition of the willing at Block Island that made that happen. And so, that I'll leave you all with that, but I'm sorry, I need to actually leave.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I know we are at time, so I feel I want to make sure that we can stay on for those who want to stay on. But I'm wondering, Ashley, how should we make sure that people don't feel like they how are we?
Right. If you need to jump off, go ahead and jump off. If you have a few minutes longer, I do want to again put it out that if Verizon or Cox wants to talk about some of their successes and what they've seen and how we can work together, that would be a great addition to the conversation as well.
Hi, it's Michelle from Verizon. We actually had a panel, I think it was maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago now. It seems so long ago, right? Everything's melding together to just talk about the broadband network with Ocean and Cox on a panel. I thought we had some really great conversation. As far as I saw some of the throttle questions, Verizon doesn't throttle on our FiOS network, which we talked about for fiber optic, and we do not have a presence with fiber optic FiOS product in Aquidneck Island or the Bristol area. And I know that's been a question that has been raised when we've been up at the State House to talk about different things with Rep. Ruggiero. But I mean, I would be happy to discuss, I think, the way that television regulation has kind of changed over the years. And I believe that the division and the PUC are currently looking at the laws around or the regulations around video regulation. But I mean, obviously, we'd be happy to stay in the conversation if you had any, if you wanted us to be part of anything, Rep. Ruggiero, I always offer my services to be part of that, to have discussions, to talk about how we can help those that are not as connected as others in the state. And, one of the things that we did during this COVID-19 was to have a low income offer come out. We had not had that in the past, as Cox did. They were, great with that right from the beginning. So those of you or those of our consumers that qualify for Lifeline, we now have some offers at some different speed offerings, like 200 over 200 for $19.99, which we had not done in the past. So, but I'd be happy to send any information if you guys wanted it to post it. If anyone had any questions, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to answer anything.
Thank you,
Michelle, it's Deb Ruggiero. I just want to say, obviously Verizon and Cox are really, really important corporate citizens in our state. So this particular advisory council that we are hoping to frame, you will be at the table because you must be at the table. I love what David called the coalition of the willing, That's what this needs to become. We have to be willing to move our state forward into the 21st century and look at how we can prepare between, the telehealth, the education, small business. We're too small of a state not to be Chattanooga, right? When you see what they've done in a small place like Tennessee. So I thank you for that offer, and I look forward to working with everyone. I just want to get the state out of the silos that I believe we all work in very nicely, in our own little corner of the world, not unlike what I did with the renewable energy. 8 years ago, Rhode Island wasn't doing any renewable energy in the state whatsoever. And it took coordinating and bringing people together in a collaborative effort. And now, we're number 3 in the nation when it comes to solar. And I believe we can get somewhere in the next 4 to 5 years. So thank you, everyone, for your help and participation. It's the first of many conversations.
Deb, to that end, if I can jump in just quickly to say, someone asked about next steps, and Toonie had to jump. So Avi, you might want to jump in with this, but I know that Venture Cafe and District Hall are planning a follow-up for this. This is sort of an amuse-bouche to a longer, more in-depth and conversational event about next steps and possible work. So Avi, you probably have more on that.
Okay.
But my last thing before I will jump off and leave the stage is I just want to name what all of us have said, which is this is on base a simple issue or a fundamental need, I should say, and simultaneously a complex and multifaceted issue. I paused earlier when Ashley said, what does 5 or 10 years look like? Because for Michelle and others on the line who are thinking about this daily, 5 to 10 years could look 1,000 different ways, depending on whether we are doubling down on, again, cell networks or fiber optic, or if we're looking at tapping into different levels of bandwidth and wave and understanding sort of how to leverage 5G in different ways, which is a whole nother conversation. And so this is simultaneously fundamental and basic on a level, but also hyper complex. And I think this is what Deb and David and everyone has been saying, is we need all of us. And so that's where this conversation was hopefully just bringing us all together to talk, really frame up the issues and really frame up the possibilities for Rhode Island. And then Avi, I will kick over to you, who has already posted in the chat about how we can continue this conversation on May 7.
Thank you so much, Daniela, Ashley, Ainsley, Deborah, and even Michelle for chiming in. Yeah, this is incredibly important, and we touched upon it as a couple weeks ago, and we'll be talking about it more in depth, for the most part, over a course of a few hours on May 7th, at the Thursday in the afternoon, probably about from 4 to 7 p.m. There's a link in the chat box.
Hey.
Yes.
Hi, this is Ross. Sorry, I had to jump off for a different conference call. So I apologize if it's been repetitive, but I know Michelle and Verizon have come out with a low-cost offer, and that's great, and we've been working well together. But did anybody mention the Connect to Compete that we have?
No. If you want to let us know, that would be great.
Connect to Compete is a program that we've had for quite a while that works with low income, right? The free lunch, reduced lunch, SNAP program, where it's $9.95 a month, and it's we bumped it up to 50 meg now for residences. We work with the schools, we work with the Boys and Girls Clubs. We're giving away 2 free months of it right now. So we've been trying to get the word out. We've had hundreds of families sign up for it, and for ours, and I'm sure for Verizon's as well. So there is a way to get this into the schools. And if the people have video with us today, it can be a self-install, right? So we don't even have to pass the threshold, so we can get it to them quickly. And I know Verizon and the other major carriers opened up the Wi-Fi on the phones for hotspots. So at least we're getting access to them immediately. And along with that, we're giving them free Cox Connect Care, which is a virtual help desk. So you talk about a person who gets a device for the first time, they get internet for the first time, they don't necessarily know how to download software and applications. So this help desk will help them with that. And then we donated $25,000 to the Rhode Island Department of Ed to buy Chromebooks, and $10,000 to CCRI to buy Chromebooks. So we're out there, we're trying to do what we can to get access everywhere. And our network, like Verizon's, is ubiquitous. It's literally everywhere in the state. So every home has access to it. So I just want to make sure we get that point across. And our network now, even the HFC, and you mentioned maybe it's a shared network, but we can offer a gig service to residents now. So high speed is there for folks. So I just want to get that in before we left. So thank you.
Thank you guys so much, and thank you for everything everyone has done to help in the last couple of weeks with our working from home and our students. We wouldn't have been able to pull this off without our corporate partners. That is definitely for sure. And we definitely look forward to, continue the conversations to see how we can work together. So in that post-COVID world of what this is going to look like, because we can't continue to just rely on, our private corporations to bail us out. And so we have to be able to work together and move the conversation forward.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Just adding really quick on the Connect to Compete, Ross, that's, I believe, available specifically for families with K-12 students, but I put in the chat, I know of a number of districts who are working directly with Cox to facilitate and support applications there. So if you do know families who are in need, and I would say have them reach out to their district, because there might be a way that their district can help them through the application process as well.
Thank you, Ashley, Daniela, and Ainsley. Thanks again, Ross, for that new information. And we'll see you all soon.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks for taking the extra time with us today, everyone.
All right, thank you.